What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review the new Russian horror film Sputnik, which is getting released by IFC Midnight on VOD this Friday, August 14th. IFC Midnight was kind enough to send me a press screener for the film, and because this movie doesn't come out for a couple more days, I've decided to go totally, completely spoiler-free for this review. However, any details or scenes or moments that are explored or revealed in the trailer, those are all fair game. But it's a little bit like going into a fight with one hand tied behind your back, because in my opinion, the most interesting qualities or the most interesting scenes in this movie are not revealed in the trailer. I know that never happens in today's movie climate, where typically they have no poker face at all and show all the best moments. But Sputnik is a slow burn, kick-ass sci-fi horror film that does manage to keep its cards close to his chest until well into the movie. And it's one that I really enjoyed, but before I start showering some praise on it, I have to apologize in advance because I don't speak a single word of Russian, and I know every single character and or filmmaker associated with this film. I'm most likely going to butcher their names in the most ruthless manner possible, so for that, I apologize. But if you haven't yet seen the trailer for Sputnik, and I strongly recommend that you do, but it's all about this Russian cosmonaut circa like 1983, 1984, who when he's coming back from space, picks up a little passenger, and it's not entirely clear whether or not this little passenger is a parasite or a symbiote, but the reality is that every night this little creature, this little being, emerges from the cosmonaut's mouth, and it's incredibly violent and incredibly aggressive. And the question is whether or not the creature can be separated from the cosmonaut because it keeps crawling back inside him, and more importantly, because this is the height of the Cold War, can this creature be turned into a weapon? Because this is a movie that is hip deep in the Russian bureaucracy of the height of the Soviet era. And I should mention that this is the debut feature film by director Igor Abramenko. He had made a few shorts prior to this, including one called Passenger, which basically served as a rough draft or jumping off point for Sputnik. But it's incredibly exciting to see a first-time director come roaring out of the gate with a debut feature as strong as this. But there's one thing I want to avoid. Anytime a new cool horror movie comes out, people tend to be a little hyperbolic in their praise, and they immediately start saying, well, this is the next Exorcist, or this is the next Alien, or this is the next whatever. I am not going to do that. Sputnik is really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Time will tell how people regard it. Sputnik is absolutely 100% worth a look, but I think the early comparisons to Alien are a little bit premature because Aliens had 40 years to build up this giant cult following. It's one of the most iconic films in the history of the genre, and it's wildly unfair to Sputnik to place that burden on it. People should just watch Sputnik and enjoy it for what it is. But no matter what Igor Abramenko does with this next film, I will be there with a big giant smile on my face. But included alongside the press screener in my little packet, there was an interview with the director where they asked him about the comparisons to Ridley Scott's Alien. And they asked him, it's obvious that Ridley Scott's Alien influenced Sputnik a lot. Can you elaborate on the connection? And he responds, Alien was always in the DNA of Sputnik. It's one of my favorite movies and inspired me throughout the whole process of making my movie. Ridley Scott's classic movie laid the foundation for the whole new genre, space horror. I'm a huge fan of those type of movies and always wanted to make one. And then when he's asked about the setting of the film, which takes place in the early mid-'80s, he said, 80s is the golden era of sci-fi movies. I thought it would be great to unfold our story in that period. I was born in the 80s and raised in the 90s, but all the movies I was raised on were from the 80s, so you could say I'm pretty familiar with this period. And when asked to call attention to his top 5 favorite movies, he said Blade Runner, The French Connection, Sorcerer, Apocalypse Now, and Jaws. And it's hard to argue with any of those movies. I've seen them all many times over. But one interesting thing I learned from his interview when he's talking about the loneliness and desolation and isolation of being up in space, the word Sputnik, it has a bit of a double meaning where it means someone who accompanies you or your doppelganger or your inner self. That's the real meaning of the word Sputnik in Russian, companion. And at the heart of the story of this doctor named Tatiana, played by Oksana Akinshina, who's an incredible actress and perfectly in keeping with the tradition established by Alien and Aliens. She's an incredibly smart, tough, resourceful protagonist. Initially, she's brought in to treat the cosmonaut's amnesia. But as her treatment begins and her investigation continues to unfold, she keeps learning more and more secrets along the way that are being concealed from her. But she's absolutely tough as nails, a great central character. But what's so much fun about watching a space horror film from Russia is that it doesn't utilize or rely upon or lean on the same familiar cliches and tropes that we see in a lot of Hollywood horror films. It makes the film so much more spontaneous and unpredictable, giving you this legitimate feeling of dread of what you might discover as the story unfolds. But what really sold me on the film was the overall just atmosphere. It's eerie as hell. There's this incredible sense of mood. Visually, the movie has tons of style. What really got my attention was this absolutely killer score by a composer named Oleg Karpachev, if I'm saying that correctly. Most likely I'm not, but we'll just move on. And the movie perfectly weaves together really smart sci-fi where it takes the science seriously at the same time ferocious, brutal, gory horror, but I wouldn't say that the gore is excessive or over the top. It definitely fits the story, but the story just happens to be a particularly violent one. And about halfway through the movie, I realized I was watching one of my favorite movies so far that I've seen in 2020, and I recognize that saying that doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot, because I think it's pretty easy to make a case for 2020 as the weakest year in the history of movies ever. But it's always a genuine thrill when a filmmaker who's relatively inexperienced makes such a bold, memorable movie their first time out. Because I watch tons of horror movies, and the genre at times can be a little tired, it can be a little repetitive, and it's just nice to see a filmmaker who's using different tricks to try to make some impact. Within the first 5 minutes of the movie, there's this one little detail that's so subtle, if you blink, you'll miss it, but it was absolutely scary as hell. It sent chills right up my neck. And while the film can be very serious, almost academic at times when it comes to all these scientists and doctors trying to figure out what's going on with this cosmonaut, it can switch gears so quickly into some really brutal, horrific imagery, which you see in the trailer. And in particular, the cosmonaut who's merged with this entity and how his eyes can go black, and he's always like in agony, just puking up all this vile stuff. And there are a few scenes that are teased in the trailer where Tatiana, she's trying to interact with this creature, and I was just chewing my fingernails right off the tips of my fingers. But the movie is not without its flaws. It's definitely got its moments where you might feel like it's starting to drag or you're starting to feel the running time. And perhaps there are a few scenes that feel a little bit too quick and too convenient in terms of how quickly the plot is pushed along. But I'd read some reviews ahead of time that the first half of the movie was very satisfying and the second half was unsatisfying. I didn't find that to be the case at all. I really enjoyed the climax of the film. Perhaps the climax of the film was a little less reliant upon horror and a little bit more reliant upon like action and gore. Nonetheless, the filmmaker does not keep any gas left over in the tank. He puts it all out there. But like I said before, I think it's premature and unfair to compare this movie to Alien, because Alien is one of the most beloved movies ever made from any era and any genre. It's spawned many sequels. It is a franchise that is still ongoing. Admittedly, the franchise has kind of suffered in recent years. Nonetheless, here we are 41 years later. People are still making Alien movies. So I think people should tap the brakes when it comes to making these comparisons to iconic films and just say that Sputnik is a really solid, really enjoyable, and very smart sci-fi horror film with a ton of great performances, some seriously effective horror scenes, and it's probably going to whet people's appetite for more genre films from Russia moving into the future. But that's all I can really say without going into heavy spoilers, so I just want to thank IFC Midnight for giving me an advanced look at this movie, and I strongly recommend that horror fans, sci-fi fans, genre fans check out this movie when it comes out on Friday on VOD. But if you have any questions, want to talk more about horror films, whether they're foreign or domestic, give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax. And if you enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, hitting the like button, all the good stuff. But thanks again for watching my video. I really appreciate it, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.